Hi, everyone. I'm Clara Wallace, and I'm the Assistant Director of Talks and Entertainment here at 6th and I. Whether you're here with us in person or watching virtually from home, thank you for being with us tonight and for your support of a nonprofit. For anyone who's here for the first time, 6th and I is a center for arts, entertainment, ideas, and Jewish life. And by attending our programs, you help fuel our mission to inspire more meaningful and fulfilling lives. So we thank you for that. We're excited to welcome Stephen Dubner back to 6th and I for this milestone 20th anniversary of Freakonomics. You may have seen Stephen on our stage over the years talking about his book, Think Like a Freak, or for live tapings of his former podcast, Tell Me Something I Don't Know. 20 years ago, when Stephen co-wrote Freakonomics with economist Stephen Levitt, they set out to demonstrate how the tools of economics could be used to understand the behavior of just about anyone, and how economics is, at its root, the study of incentives, how people get what they want or need, especially when other people want or need the same thing. What the authors didn't anticipate was that Freakonomics would become a cultural phenomenon that changed how millions of people think about how the world works. The book spent over 2 years on the New York Times bestseller list and spawned 3 sequels, a documentary film, and Freakonomics Radio, well before podcasting was mainstream. Over the past 20 years, the Freakonomics empire has shown us the hidden side of everything and invited us to question what we think we know. Stephen Dubner will be in conversation this evening with the award-winning political correspondent, Geoff Bennett. Geoff is the co-anchor and co-managing editor of PBS NewsHour, and he also serves as an NBC News and MSNBC political contributor. We're grateful to have him on our stage for the first time tonight. Thank you again to everyone, both here and at home, for joining us. Please help me give Stephen Dubner and Geoff Bennett a warm welcome to 6th and I.
Hiya. All right.
Well, good evening, everybody. Congratulations on 20 years. Does it feel like 20 years?
Feels like 19 and a half, I'd say. Yeah, it's been, all of us work hard and care about things. And a lot of the things you work hard at and care about don't work out the way you want. You need a certain amount of luck or timing or whatever it is. And with this project, I had it. And it's been paying dividends for 20 years. So I've gotten to do the work that I want to do for 20 years because the book worked. So I think about that every day. So does it seem like 20 years? Yes, in a way. It went fast, but in a way, it's like I think about it so often, it could have been like 4,000 years. I'm so invested in it, but I'm very grateful.
Yeah. Among the things that struck me in the book was that you wrote that at the outset, you and Steve Levitt were bored by convention. What conventions, whether intellectual, academic, journalistic, did you see yourselves rebelling against?
That's a really good question. So I love journalism. I think journalism is quite important. I think good journalism is really hard to do. We were talking earlier, Geoff and I, about a former colleague of mine, friend Jeffrey Goldberg, who runs The Atlantic. And I used to work with Jeffrey when I was an editor, and he was a writer. And he was one of really the few people, he was writing magazine pieces for the New York Times Magazine then. He was one of the few people that had what I consider like the big 3 traits you need to be a really good print journalist, which was a good reporter/researcher. You had to know where to find material. A good thinker. You had to take what you have and sort it out. And sort it out could mean 100 different things. Then you had to be able to write well. Mm-hmm. And very few people can do all 3 of those things. So, what was the question? I have no idea what the question was.
When you say that you were bored by convention, what conventions were you rebelling against?
So as much as I love journalism, a lot of journalism I think is not very good. Just like a lot of anything is not very good. We used to disparagingly say in journalism, or once I started to work with economists and people who were more numerate, because there's not a lot of numeracy in journalism. And one of the things that I really wanted to do with Freakonomics was show a style of writing that was just narrative, nonfiction, journalism-based, all factual, all fact-checked, and so on, but where you tell good stories, as with journalism, but you've got the data underneath it. And in my case, I hooked up with this amazing data partner, Steve Levitt, who'd done all this research that we could sort of harness or exploit for telling different stories. But then when you start to look back on how a lot of journalism is done, it's like, if you notice one thing as a journalist, you like note it away. And if you notice two, you're like, oh. And then three, like, that's a trend.
Right.
Okay, but you may have just noticed three. It may have nothing to do with the actual, like, you have no idea how normal or anomalous that may be. So a lot of the things from studying or hanging around with economists that I began to appreciate were things like time series. You have to recognize how a trend or movement will shift over time. Order of magnitude. Is this thing I'm seeing, because I live in this neighborhood where there's a lot of stuff going on, does that mean that it's going on everywhere and so on? So I wanted to bring to the kind of writing that I've always liked to do some other layers or dimensions that in this case came from economics and the other social sciences, but I also love journalists who marry up storytelling with physics and other sciences and so on. I think it's a very natural blend. I think there are a lot of people who do it. There aren't a ton who do it really well, and when they do, it succeeds. Malcolm Gladwell, I think of Shankar Vedantam, who I think lives somewhere around here.
Yeah.
And to me, the great, what I wish is that I wish more journalism would lean that way more intuitively. There have been journalism programs why am I talking? Nobody cares about journalism. I realize, as journalists, as a writer and as a journalist, I love to think and talk about this stuff, but I realize nobody cares. I will say one thing and then I'll shut up, which is Columbia University a bunch of years ago decided to really overhaul their J School and make it much more interdisciplinary. So you had sociologists like Sudhir Venkatesh, who was a collaborator of ours, who was in this book, coming in to work with journalists, and I think that's great. The more multidisciplinary journalism can get, the better.
One more question about process that's not specific to journalism, because I am really interested in how the data guy and the storyteller find a shared voice. There are a million reasons why a collaboration like that should not work, but yours did work. How?
This is, again, something I'm super grateful for. I think Steve Levitt is one of the most unusual and creative minds I've ever encountered. I know he is, that I've ever encountered. And so he was a great partner for me. And he's a great economist, even though a very atypical economist. Steve Levitt, the one shortcoming I can think of for Levitt that I'm willing to say in public is that he thinks that I'm as good at writing as I think he is at economics.
Okay.
So he thought when he found me that he was the lucky one. And I'm pretty sure that I was the lucky one. But we truly felt that way about each other. And so that's what made it work. There was a lot of trial and error in the beginning. It was terrible. We tried for a while to literally write together, sit at the computer, and him say words, and me think words, and me type words, and they were barely words.
And the publisher wasn't convinced that this was going to work and also hated the name. Is that right?
Yeah, they had many regrets, yes. And then but it worked out okay, yeah.
You said at the time that the book had no central thesis. 20 years on, does that still hold?
I think it does, but if I were forced, I would say, I would say, since we're sitting in the synagogue, I would say one of my favorite lines from all of Jewish, teaching is the very, very simple one. Turn it and turn it, for everything is in it being the Torah. So the idea is that any topic you can take, and this is what we love about doing what we do, you can take any curiosity you have and talk to enough interesting people, and it becomes fascinating for you. So once again, I've forgotten the original question. I'm not kidding. I have a very short-term memory.
I almost forgot the question, too.
Does anybody remember the question? It was a good question. It was good.
Oh, no central thesis.
No central thesis, yeah.
Is there a thesis?
So if I wanted to say there's a philosophical-ish thesis, I would say that I wouldn't say that everything is interesting, but everything is worth examination, because you never know. But then if I want to make it a little bit more concrete or pragmatic or a little bit more of a blueprint, I would say that and I think we do write this in the book, which is that data are really useful for a lot of things, but especially if you can use them to understand the incentives that people respond to. That's the thing. So if you think about as a parent or if you're making public policy, whatever it is, you try to come up with what you think is a good idea and the right thing, and then you try to think about how people will respond to that. And that can be very difficult because the kind of people who make rules often don't have that much in common with the people that they're giving the rules to and wanting to be followed. And so understanding how people will respond to any program is tricky because the incentives are sort of hard to figure out. If you can use the data to understand why people make the decisions that they do, then I think you can really make progress in the world. And when economists talk about incentives, most of us just think of financial incentives, and that's plainly an important thing, but we have so many others. You know, we care about who we are, we care about our relationships with people and so on. And sometimes those are the incentives that will rule, but they're very hard to anticipate.
Yeah. Well, what's another real-world example of that?
A very concrete one has to do with real estate sales, which you wrote about in the first book, which is when you are selling a house and you hire a real estate agent to represent you, you figure that they represent you. But then when you figure out how the incentives are actually whacked up, like let's say it's a 6% commission, and then half of it goes back to the buyer's brokerage, and then the seller's broker now has 3%, but they kick back, let's say, half of that to their home agency. All of a sudden, their personal incentive is 1.5%, which means that you might want to hang on for a while and not take the first good offer. And you think you could get another $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, which to you is a great deal. But if the person who's theoretically fully on your team is only getting 1.5% of that, then those incentives are not aligned so well.
Yeah, that's true. Hadn't thought of it in that way. You also said in the book, and I took notes on this, that you thought Freakonomics, you saw it as an exercise in curiosity without cynicism. That's a beautiful phrase. Unpack what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to tip into cynicism. You know, I think we're living through an extraordinarily unusual time, an extraordinarily, noisy time. When I say noise, I mean not just noise, but also signal to noise ratio. Like, there's a lot of noise and not that much signal. I find this in news. That's why I like your show so much.
Thank you.
Like, you all know his show, I gather, NewsHour. It's a great, great, great news show.
Very kind for saying that. Thank you.
And one reason I think it's so good is it's very simple. You guys do a good job at giving a lot of information that I can then figure out what I want to do with, as opposed to a little bit of information then being kind of harangued about how I need to feel about that information. And so, once again, I'm pretty sure I've forgotten the actual question, but this is
an exercise in curiosity without cynicism. The other side of that is, do you ever worry that people can apply the data cynically and use the data to justify whatever they want?
Yeah, but I think the older I get, the more experience you get doing a thing, I put you in a bad situation. Now I'm just trying to get, I don't want to have, there. When I first started publishing as a journalist in New York City, a bunch of years ago, this was pre-internet, and you become acquainted with the letter to the editor ecosystem. And it's a very funny ecosystem because it was a really small subset of people who had the time and the energy and the anger to write a letter to the editor.
Right.
Okay? And you would read them, and they were almost always based in some legitimate grievance, but they were usually, quite overboard. And the way I learned to think about it was, I'm the writer, I had my say, I did my best. I had an idea, I executed as well as I could, we fact-checked, we did the whole thing. I had the platform, and I turned it over, and now whoever reads it, they should be able to say whatever they want about it. What's happened in recent years, called 20 years, is that everybody writes a letter to the editor, but it's not to the editor, it's to you directly, and it's to the world, and it's very voluminous, and it's very noisy, and it's not very considered. The people who used to write letters to the editor would take an hour and a half to write a 3-page letter with every stupid thing you said. And now it's just like you're a blank or you are in the pocket of blank, whatever. And you as the writer, none of that is true, or at least you hope none of that is true. But it's very easy to think that that noise represents kind of the norm. I don't think it does. I still think that the world is still mostly full of fantastically well-intentioned people, kind people, people who want to be loved and want to love back, people who want to be adored and want to adore back. And I think that a great deal of the anger and hatred comes from people who really feel unloved. I really think that's at the root of it. I mean, if you read any psychology, philosophy, theology, it seems pretty clear to me. And so in a way, I've never been a cynic, but when I feel people being cynical and trying to use information in a way like that, I don't necessarily communicate directly with them, but I keep it in mind so that the next show I make, I really just try to present an argument or an idea in a way that shows that this is not done to punish anyone, that a rising tide really does lift all boats. It's happened so many times in history, and I just want it to keep happening. And so, yeah, I think skepticism is good. You never want to believe anything at face value without checking it out. But cynicism, I think, is the first few steps on a place that I don't think we need to go.
Well, building on your point about the signal-to-noise ratio these days, how do you define the hidden side of everything when everything is visible? Everything feels tracked and monetized. How do you create space for yourself and for Freakonomics?
So I don't have a job. This is all I do, right? So what that means is I have a lot of time. Like, unlike you have to show up every day and have a story meeting in the morning and start making plans, and then things change. And like, I would die. I could do it for like 1 week. I'm like a cheap version of a hothouse flower, whatever that is, like a very inexpensive, like I just need to be in my environment doing my thing. And what I do is I just spend a lot of time alone, but thinking, reading, and I do love to talk to people, but that's where ideas come from all those things, music and plays and reading and blah, 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 blah. But also, there is just I am constantly amazed at how interesting the world remains, even when you think you know a lot. So we've got a podcast series that it's a 3-part. We published the first one, I think, a couple days ago, Friday morning, 6 a.m. Eastern time. It's on kind of the economics of the horse industry, the horse market.
Oh.
And, I've been to tracks a bit. I'd never grown up really as horses as pets or dressage or anything like that. So I knew a little bit about racehorsing, but not much else. And I went to an economics conference. I got to talking to this woman there. She's a chief economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit. And somehow it comes up that she just bought a second horse. Like, I didn't know you had a first horse. Tell me more. And I'm like, what do you... And she does equestrian. I can't remember which one she's in. Hunter jumper, maybe, not dressage. Uh-huh. And I said, what do you pay for a horse like that? Because I'm obnoxious, okay? So I will say that. Cynicism I'm not in favor of. Obnoxious is okay.
Sometimes, or inquisitive. Inquisitive. There you go.
That's the other problem is I was the youngest in a big family. I didn't really get to talk that much for a long time. So now I'm just like, So I said, what do you pay for a horse like that? And she said, well, I can't tell you that. And I said, well, that means it's more than. She said, well, and then I just keep going. And then I finally get she was good. She didn't give me the number of her horse. She said, a horse very much like mine, bought by someone like me in a market like this might pay about blank. And it was low-ish 6 figures for a hobby horse. Oh, okay. This is not I just outed her. Okay, I'm going to rewind. So, no, but most people who buy these, it's kind of an advanced hobby. Mm-hmm. They all compete, and but most of them are not thinking about like the Olympics, although some do. And then she said, but if you think that's a lot, especially in the Florida market, there are billionaires who buy $2 million horses for their kids just to train on, just to see if they're any good at it. And moreover, almost none of these sales are recorded anywhere, all private transactions. So that got me really interested because I had done a series about the economics of the art markets, which are fascinating, the intersection with galleries, artists, museums. There's so much there. And even though it's economics, like I do like the economics of these things, it's about much more. And so with horses, it became really fun. And so if I can find an idea like that, 6-8 times a year, And then there are things in the news that I do like to play off of. We did a piece a couple weeks ago about the doctor shortage. We could have done a 12-parter on that. It's such a big thing. So, I do have a journalist, I have journalist DNA from working at the Times and elsewhere, but then kind of the let's put on a show DNA also from, playing music and all those other things.
Yeah. Is that typically how stories and ideas find their way to you? Just conversations you're having with people, or just you're watching the news and you get a spark of an idea?
Yeah, not so much the news, no offense. I mean,
Yeah.
no, I'm not kidding.
None taken.
No, I'm not kidding, because like what I said about your show, like I do learn a lot there. A lot of the median news broadcasts on TV irritates me because there's such little information and it's all done theatrically. It's more entertainment than news. And so I'm not saying it's bad. It's very well done. It's very professional. It's unbelievably well done. Like, I think we're living in an age of gonzo broadcast art. Like, if I think about, like, if you watch I'm an NFL fan. If I watch a 3-hour NFL telecast, I think that is one of the most majestically produced live 3-hour theatrical broadcast events you could imagine. The photography, the commentary and so on. It's unbelievable how good we are at entertainment like that. The problem is too much of the news has become entertainment like that for me. So I do like to I just hang out with people who do interesting things. I love smart people. I love humble people. I love decent people. So if I meet a smart, humble, decent person, I just glom onto them and, talk to them until they're so sick of me, but it's the way I like to learn. Yeah,
that's terrific. Well, if Freakonomics is all about knowing what to measure and encouraging people to measure it well, what are we measuring well in 2025? And what are we falling short on?
What a great question.
Thank you.
What your question reminds me of, which is not a direct answer, though it might become one, although I'm going to forget the question at least twice on the way to it becoming one. It reminds me of a talk I saw at that same conference where I met this woman about the horses. I saw Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, give a talk, and it was not a public economics conference, so he was speaking to other economists. Not like Jay Powell is off the chain when he's talking to other economists. He's still pretty much the same guy.
He's going rogue.
Yeah. But he said something that I think to all economists and to him maybe was obvious, but to me made me sit up and pay attention, which was how good the U.S. government has been at collecting, analyzing, storing, and distributing data. So if you think about it over the past 100 years, just the amount of government data we've had to work on, whether it has to do with jobs, housing, education, on and on and on. Not all of that comes from the government, not all of it comes from the federal government, but a great, great deal does. And so he was just making a kind of side comment that the quality of data coming out of the US government that pertains to economics is really large. So I would agree with him. I think it's been damaged since then. I mean, this was probably 6 or 8 months ago. So like we're seeing, the jobs data is being, I don't know what the jobs data are. And I'm not enough of a nerd to go into it and tell, but all my friends are nerds who do that. And so what's interesting is, it's never binary. I think that's one thing we try to do with Freakonomics, or everything I try to do on the radio show. Almost nothing is a binary, sometimes it's a yes or no, high or low, black or white, but very seldom. And that I think the reality lives in the gap there, and that one of the jobs of a writer, a journalist, or an artist, or parent, anyone, is to kind of get in that gap and sort it out. And so, for instance, now that the typical government jobs data seem to be, changed on dimensions that most people think is probably not very good, it turns out that the private sector has started to aggregate a lot of jobs data because it's in their interest to have that too. Excuse me. So that may be a case where an incentive was created by the change in government policy that may create a better stream of data for all we know. We'll have to see.
What is lost when we lose quality data at the federal level, or lose trust and confidence in data at the federal level?
Excuse me. I would like to think we lose the main tool in the policymaking toolkit. That's what I would like to argue. But that would imply that data has been used as the main tool in the policymaking toolkit. And,
You got the right audience for an
know.
argument like that.
And look, it hurts me to say this, but I am not a big fan of politics. And the reason is it frustrates me too much because I know how important it is, but the way that I've kind of, I was going to say been trained. It's not like I was trained as a PhD economist to look at things this way, but I have hung out with Steve Levitt and other economists now long enough to kind of naturally think this way. And if I know that you just want my data, this goes back to what you were saying about cynicism. If I read a paper, an econ paper, and that this happened to Steve Levitt, happened to every economist I know, and they'll get a call from a staffer on the Hill who wants to use the paper to make an argument, would you be willing to come on and consult with us or whatever, go on TV, whatever. But then you might get a call the next day from someone on the other side of the aisle about the same paper wanting you to do a different piece of the argument. And you realize that, when you're the cherry being picked, it's no fun. And so I think that's a big problem universally, is that we make as individuals, we make too many decisions based on emotion, thinking fast versus thinking slow. You may have heard that's the title of a wonderful book by Danny Kahneman, who is not a mentor of mine, but a big influence of mine. We make too many personal and family decisions on emotion and having a lack of data. And I think we make too many policy decisions having access to a lot of data, but just enough to know that you can exploit it to make an argument that is not really an empirical argument. And that frustrates me. Just basic. I don't think you have to be a Republican, a Democrat, whatever, to just look at the data on, for instance, the amount of money that the federal government distributes for any one of a number of child-related causes. So in this country, we support families and children much less than any other rich country. Much, much, much less. Some people on one side may tell you, well, there are different tax incentives that make up for it, and that's not untrue. But if you look at it, if you look at the data, it's pretty overwhelming. If you look at the way that we support families generally, and then when you look at what we know about how a loved and supported child turns out on average versus one who receives neither a lot of love nor support, it's a no-brainer. If you want to have a thriving, healthy society, support children on every level, support families on every level. And the data are there to indicate that we're not very good at doing that federally. And I know the arguments from both sides. Mm-hmm. They both have very legitimate points, but when I get in the middle of that, I give up. What's a person like me to do? So sometimes I feel not like I'm hiding. When I do a series on horses, I got an email the other day from someone that says, there's all this chaos going on. Why are you doing horses? And how am I going to? They're right. They're right. But you know what? I'm doing horses because all this chaos is going on. And I think there's still a lot of room in the world to, ask questions, be curious, spend time with good people. Because I think, government is important for sure, but it's the people that makes a place. It's not the government that makes a place. And so I think, I'm very pro-people. I'm just not huge on politics.
Well, let me ask you, what did you learn from Steve about applying economics to questions or applying data to questions that seemed absurd on the surface, but then over time you thought, wow, he's really onto something?
I think the biggest thing I learned from Steve Levitt and from other economists was reading their papers in their journals, which I encourage you to do, especially if you've ever had any sleep issues. They're written in a language that really isn't English. It's not the English that we know. Economics papers are filled with words that are just beautifully bizarre. Heteroscedasticity. Okay, let's live with that one for 10 minutes.
Which means what?
I have no idea. Heteroscedasticity, I think it has to do with a certain type or form of randomness. Okay. But the question was, so what they do in their econ papers that I think is great for all of us, especially for journalists, and other social scientists don't do this in their papers. Like if you read psych papers or sociology, and I think econ is just better. They work with bigger data sets and whatever. They say, this paper is going to argue that blank. Let's say that blank is that, minimum wage laws don't generally have the intended effect of lifting incomes for the people that we really want to lift incomes for. And in fact, they may discourage job growth because there are firms that will lay people off as the minimum wage rises, right? That's an old argument. And as it turns out, in the economics literature, there's a lot of really good research arguing on either side. It's a very tricky issue, and it's very case-specific. But what an economics paper will do when it's laying out its argument, it says, here's our thesis. And we're going to tell you how we reach the thesis. Here's the data. Here's the methodology of analyzing the data. Here's the countervailing forces. Here's the things we couldn't answer, and so on. But one thing they also do is say, here are, let's say, 5 other possible explanations other than ours. And we're going to interrogate those also. And we'll tell you why we think those are not the most legitimate. It's like I said before, turn it and turn it for everything is in it. Go in, study it deeply, come out, and then synthesize and write it very simply. So with Levitt, I was really invited because of him. He invited me into this sort of fraternity of amazingly brilliant people, these economists, who came from a variety of backgrounds. They're all very good at math, because economics got very mathy for a period there. It wasn't always, and hopefully it won't always be that way in the future. But these are people who, some math is good, but when the papers are all theory that no one can read and understand, it's not very useful, I think, for the discipline. So, but when you spend time with people who know, rather than the knee-jerk response, like, oh, X policy is about to be invoked. Well, I've been reading the Washington Post, or I've been reading the Wall Street Journal. I know how that's going to turn out. No, you don't. Nobody knows how it's going to turn out. And the best you can do to make an educated guess is to look at a lot of data, to look at history, to look at economic history, to try to talk to people who really understand the mechanism that's being invoked right now, and using real data to figure out how that might work. And that I find thrilling in the way that, like, if you're in grad school and you're studying literature and you really sort of figure it out, that can be thrilling. If you're studying some religious tradition, you read these religious texts and figure, oh, that's what they're getting at there, or philosophy. And so to me, economics is a sort of toolkit that I was invited to use, not quite as a professional. Like, if they were safe-cracking tools, like, I might be the guys that broke into the Louvre. Like, it was a great idea, but I wasn't, I was kind of sloppy. I wasn't really a total pro, but, like, I know how to use the tools. That's the way I am.
Would you back a ladder up to the building and then climb up into the window?
Okay, I thought that was a very good idea.
That was next level. 20 years on, what insights have aged well and which have not?
Wow, I don't know if I'm the one to answer that. I am a pack rat when it comes to my stuff, my work. I have cases, too many files.
You write about that, the plastic bins of paper.
I do. The forward of this book, this is how bad I am. The forward of this book, the reason this book is published in November and not in, like, September, is because this 3-page forward that I ended up writing, that I really wanted to write, it took me 6 months. Because I really needed to kind of figure out what I wanted to say. And what I wanted to say was related to the fact that, as you know, I have these bins and bins and bins of mostly work product, drafts of articles. But, like, for every 2 pages you write for a book, you have this much in printed out research material. And I can't throw it. I don't know what to do with it. So I'm kind of hamstrung with it. I've already forgotten the question. I know that I've forgotten the question.
Insights that aged well.
Yeah,
and
I'm
those
circling back to it. So here's the thing. I kind of dread thinking about the past. I can't cut the past off. I respect the past and I love it, and it makes me feel a certain way, but it makes me feel usually mournful, the past generally. Other than, I like reading economic history because it's not like my past. So I don't really think about that. I really do think about, like, what's coming into me today. And what I do know is every day we get a lot of correspondence from people who have used something from Freakonomics, the books or the radio show, to do awesome stuff. There is a bill being considered in Congress right now having to do with trying to increase the amount of kidney donations because of some work related to some work that we had done on kidney donations. I did a piece a year ago maybe about the astonishingly high false positive rate on penicillin allergies, which it turns out if you think that you're allergic to the penicillin family of drugs, I'll bet you $100 that you're not. And at the end of the night, I'll win a lot more money because 9 out of 10 people think they are and they're not. So I'm going to walk away the winner there. And that was a piece that I did, and I'm getting all these emails from people who have cleared from the wrong allergy, their parents who now are in a hospital and need a drug but couldn't get it, to their kids who are told that they're allergic to stuff. So I love having a small effect in that way. I think from this book and the books that we wrote, I know there are a lot of people who trampolined into something. I think the single biggest category is actually a terrible one. A lot of people read and still read our books when they're young, 14, 15, 16, and then they go to college and they say, I'm going to study economics because I really like Freakonomics. And then they get in their first class like, this is terrible. It's so boring, it's unrelated to anything. So I think that might be the biggest negative effect we've had.
Generations of children misled by you in your book. That's incredible. I want to talk about the business of what you do in the medium, because you had the book, then you launched a blog, then the podcast. And the blog and the podcast existed long before blogs and podcasts were even a thing. Did you see the podcast boom in particular coming?
No, that was, again, really, really lucky. So Levitt and I just finished the manuscript for our second book, Super Freakonomics. This was maybe 2009. And I was just a little lonely. So, I love Levitt. We have a great, great, great partnership, and we're very, very good friends. It's been a remarkable partnership. But we've never lived in the same place. Even though we collaborated on the books, I'm the writer, so I would be the one alone in the room, and then I would run everything by him, and sometimes he would participate a lot, sometimes less. But it was lonely, and I really wanted to do something collaborative. I missed that a lot. And in my earlier years, before I became a journalist by profession, I was a musician. That was my life. And when you're in a band, it's kind of like being married to a few people. It's a very close relationship. And so when I stopped that, I missed it a lot, but it was also very stressful. So I became a writer. I liked doing it alone. Then my partnership with Levitt was kind of like being in a band again. It was really, really, really fun. And I think that gave me the taste again for a little bit more collaboration. So when I started the podcast, part of the reason was I want to have a little gang. And I just did it for fun. I always liked audio. When I was a kid, I had a cassette recorder. I loved to record voices. I was playing music when I was little, noises out. So I just loved audio. I feel like when you listen to audio and you don't see the image, you bring so much of yourself to it. And so I'd always loved audio, and I always loved interviewing as a journalist. So I'd write a piece about Steven Spielberg for the New York Times Magazine. I would come home with dozens of hours of audio tape and transcribe it myself back in the old days with a little transcriber with the pedal, and you really get to know the material that way. And I loved that. It's hard to be very productive. Technology has totally changed that. I get a transcript from Trent now 5 minutes after the 2-hour interview. So it's remarkable how the technology is helping with things like that. Lost my thought. Anybody?
Did you see the podcast boom coming?
Yeah. So what appealed to me about you are so good, by the way.
That's high praise coming from you.
No,
so
you're super. Your eyes listen in a way that makes it so intense I can barely look at you. This is awesome.
So you know why I learned that? Scott, we were talking earlier about the past journalism experiences, and I used to work for Scott Simon as his editor at NPR, one of the best broadcasters ever. I learned that from Scott.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
Well, when you're doing in-person audio, that's really important because you don't want to keep going, So I don't do most in-person audio, which is a problem for me because I'm getting ready to do this new project, which is in person. I have to learn to shut up. No, seriously, I'm the biggest interrupter. But the thing about the podcasting that really appealed to me is two things that I loved. Interviewing. And when I say interviewing, it's really having a conversation. It's bringing yourself to the conversation and trying to learn about a person and what they do. But I also love what audio is. So if I were to write a piece about Steven Spielberg for the Times Magazine, those cover stories are about 8,000 words, which sounds like a lot. If I were to measure the ratio of that 8,000 that is actually him talking, it's maybe 20%, 30%. Then you have other voices talking about him. Then you have the writer explaining, right? And I like that. Like, I have an ego, just like every writer, but it's different because the person being portrayed, it's really a piece of writing that's really about the writer as much as the person. And I get that. I like that form. I like the magazine profile format. I've always loved that. But with audio and a podcast, the listener, which is the audience, gets to experience the subject in a much more legitimate, unvarnished way. You're hearing them. You're hearing their voice. You're hearing their pauses. You're hearing their laughter. You're hearing when they get a little exasperated with a question I might ask. And so I really like the idea of combining those two, and that's why I did a podcast. And then when it became like a going business, that was just a surprise to everybody. Yeah.
Well, how do you know when a question is worthy of an entire episode or can sustain an episode or series?
Man, you are too good for your own good, Geoff Bennett. You know, I try to operate fearlessly, by which I mean you have to trust your instincts. If I think something is interesting, even if no one on my team, everyone on my team, like this, I think this started with horses in the beginning. It's like, what? And, but over time, they got even more enthusiastic than I, to their credit. Because once you learn about it, you get enthusiastic. You know, you can't think, if midway in you decide it's not a good question, you just dump it. I'm a weekly show, so I can't dump, like, we go fairly far down the road on quite a few things, then just throw them away. But, you know, we've published things that I didn't think were A-plus pieces, you know, but if it gets below, like, B-plus, I pull the plug or run a repeat or something, because I don't like that. The biggest challenge I have is when I come up with a question that I like and that I think is a valuable question, but I can't find anything empirical, anything data, any good data on it. And then I'm likely to give it up because I need to find someone who can quantify it for me. Because otherwise then you're just talking around it, and I don't like that.
Yeah. Well, when I think of incredible storytellers, I think of you, I think of Scott Simon, I think of Robert Krulwich. How do you translate intellectual rigor into accessible storytelling? Is there a process? Is there a do this, then that, then this that gets you to that point? How do you think about it?
You know, that's a good one, too. I mean, at the risk of sounding, whatever the bad word is, arrogant, cocky, I think there's a certain amount of talent in it. But I think the talent is not what people think. I think in audio, it really helps to have a good ear. And one of the first questions that I ask anyone that I'm potentially going to work with in audio is whether they ever played or sang music. And if the answer is no, it turns out they're usually not my kind of people. Because if you think about it, what is the human voice other than the most amazing musical instrument ever invented? That's what it is. Think about what you can do with your voice. You can express dozens of emotions. So I think part of it is when you're talking to someone the first time, but then when if you're editing on paper, which you and I both do, if that's in your brain, if you can really hear that instrument go, that's a big advantage. A lot of people can't do that. And then when you're listening to rough cuts and music cuts and final cuts, and you're always listening for, does this explain it well? If there's emotion in it, is the emotion legitimate? You don't want to, gin things up. Is my question, am I trying to sound like a smart person? That's something I try to avoid. Like, I take pride in like doing my homework and like being prepared, but like, I don't like the interviews where, here's my theory. Do you agree with that? Like, I hear a lot of those. I'm not much for those. I'm like, I try to act kind of like a fairly intelligent, like maybe 10th grader who gets the opportunity to sit down with someone who's really a master of some domain of knowledge and say, I really want to know, teach me that.
Yeah. Well, I want to start incorporating some of the audience questions. Some of you in the room and folks who are watching online submitted some really terrific questions. This one from Jana. Do you regret anything you put into the Freakonomics books, be it opinions you voiced or takes you defended that you wished you hadn't?
I mean, I think everyone loves confessions. and loves mistakes aired publicly, I hate to say it, like, I know there have been things that we've written that certainly people didn't like a lot. That's kind of the nature of it. But no, I don't regret them. There is a mantra from someone, it's probably something that someone says Churchill said, but he almost certainly didn't. Because it's either, if like it's not Churchill, it's Mark Twain. If it's not Mark Twain, it's Confucius. And like, but anyway, it was something about like no indecision, no regrets. And when I first read that, I thought, oh, that's cocky, but no indecision, no regrets. But then I realized it's very valuable. Like, once you're on a path, it's not like I decided I'm not going to murder this person and now I am and I should reconsider. I'm not talking about that kind of indecision. That's a good indecision. That's a rare indecision. But I mean by no indecision would mean that once I'm committed to thinking through an idea, let me do it even if it's really hard. And the no regrets is if I've really given it my all. And I give it my all, every script, I even read the ads with great intention. I really do. Like, I think there are some things in this world that when you do them with intention or not, they look very similar, but they're different. Like, look, we're in a synagogue. Prayer with intention is different than prayer without intention. Sex without intention is basically like, I don't want to say sex without intention is pornography per se, but it's heading in that territory. Writing or being a communicator of ideas without intention and care, then you're just asking people to pay attention to you. And so I don't do that. I sometimes make mistakes and I fail all the time, but when you know that you've done it with a good heart and with intention, then even if people perceive it ungenerously, I'm okay with that.
Sam asks, have you ever chosen not to publish a true but combustible finding because the likely misinterpretation outweighed public benefit?
That is so Sam. I know that, Sam. The only thing I can think, like a sexy finding that we were going to maybe do a radio episode on, and then it turns out I think the data just weren't good. But it was a paper, and if I may be wrong in that the data weren't good, so I hope I'm not insulting whoever wrote this paper, but it was an argument that I think it was the argument that the availability of online pornography was probably a driver in the decrease in sexual assault crimes. And this was someone who had purported to measure that quite carefully. So if you're an economist or someone trying to measure an effect like that, how can you do that? And like, when a new TV show or a new type of show is introduced and it would get rolled out in different parts of the country over time, you could measure the effect of that versus crime or education, whatever, in that area. So you try to isolate what economists would call an instrumental variable. And so these guys or these people had done some version of that, I think, with pornography and sexual assaults. I think someone had done something similar with the attendance of violent movies and violent crime, and found that it went down, and then there was maybe an argument that, well, it went down because the people who would be doing the crime are actually in the movie theaters at the time, so maybe that was why. Or it could be a different idea, which is that if you kind of get your yayas out by watching this brutal stuff, then you're less inclined to do it. I don't know. So there are those things that are kind of titillating without enough merit to go on that we pass up.
Laura asks, are there any tips for federal employees who now find ourselves unexpectedly out of work, especially those over 60 who can't or don't want to retire just yet?
Wow, yeah, that's a tough one, a good one. I would say I'm worthless for this kind of advice, but what I would say that's adjacent to this problem is that I think a lot of us make decisions about what to do in life generally, career or a project, and we base it on the likelihood of success or the payout if you get it. So we all know a lot of people who pursued a career, education, they went to law school or medical school, whatever, and maybe most of them ended up working out great, but many of them, maybe not so much for medical school, because I think most people who do that really do it for a very different set of reasons. But a lot of people, get a business degree or a law degree because it's prestigious, they'll make money, they'll feel good about themselves, they can have the life they want, and then they find that they don't like it. A lot of people don't like their jobs, unfortunately. And so what Levitt really persuaded me, the more work we did together, and we wrote about a number of things that kind of ran into this idea, which is that it's really hard to get good at something unless you really love it. Because how do you get good at something? You practice, obsess, gather feedback, analyze it, and you have to be really devoted to do all that if it's something you don't like. If you find something that you like or love, this whole idea about follow your passion, maybe, but it's got to be a passion that you've really got a knack for or a skill for or a devotion to. And so I guess what I'm saying may sound like a first cousin of follow your passion, but it's really not. It's more like find something you really like and are good at. And if you want to bring a little economics into it, find something at which you think you've got what they called a comparative advantage. Something in which you, for whatever set of reasons, you're a little bit better than most people at it. And that you know that it's the kind of thing that will light you up every day and that will even keep you up at night. And that's the thing that I find that if you do that, there's certainly no guarantee that it's going to turn into a thing that rewards you monetarily and reputation-wise and so on, but it's a heck of a lot better of a gamble, I think, than the other way around, which is let me try the tried and true path that there are many people on because it leads to a lot of money and so on, because then you're entering into this sort of tournament model, as economists would call it, where the competition is intense. So try to do what you think you can do really, really well, and if you do it that well, it's going to have value to someone. Then you have to think about how to monetize it, but that's a whole other. But that's, in the digital economy, monetizing individual creativity and monetizing individual work has actually become much easier.
Yeah, that's terrific advice. Claire asks, if you could rewrite Freakonomics in 2025, which would be a heavy lift since it took 6 months to write 3 pages of the foreword, but if you could, what's the biggest change you would make and why? Has anything in the past 2 decades, new research, changes in the world at large, made you question conclusions from the book?
Well, again, I'd say the conclusions we feel really good about. There's certainly been new research in some of the areas. We always look at that research. In one case, maybe the most famous case from Freakonomics, this was research that Levitt had done before I met him with John Donahue, a legal scholar, about the relationship between abortion and crime, the argument being that the legalization of abortion at the Supreme Court level with Roe v. Wade led to a decrease in crime across the United States because it led to fewer unwanted children being born, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier about wantedness and being loved and paid, resources and attention being paid to you. So if you think about that from a social science perspective, that's not a very surprising argument, right? But there are other perspectives to think about that from. But the real issue is Levitt had made a coding error in the original paper. And even I think by the time that we wrote about it, that paper had been floated and Levitt had responded to that the way that academics do. But then years later, Levitt and John Donahue, the original scholar, went back and kind of re-examined the entire collage of evidence with new data and found the finding to be actually even stronger. So yeah, we try to do a version of social science storytelling that's really based on fact and reporting and data and fact-checking, so I feel good about that. In terms of what I would do different, the tone of the book, I think, would be totally different. First of all, we were a lot younger. We just were. It's 20 years ago. You're a different person. I'm 62. You're a different person then. The world was different. I think we sound like, if you read we didn't change the book. We thought about it, and I thought, I wanted it to be the same book with a different cover. We found a couple typos, and there's a new foreword. Because you write a book, the book is the book. I could write another one someday, and we wrote sequels. So I didn't feel the need to do that. But I think that if I were I did read it again, and parts of it were a little bit painful just because we sound like immature and callow. But we were, like Levitt and I are both, we are a pair of 9-year-olds when you get us together sometime. We just have, but
That's the best kind of partnership, though.
Well, part of that is great because it's like, hey, have you ever thought of this? No, what would happen if we did? And then let's go. And so it's nice to have a partner like that. So I think there's a certain juvenilia in there that I would probably do very, very differently, but I'm not so sure it'd be better. I think it's a good thing to be in touch with not your inner child, but like your actual old child.
Well, on that point, what have you learned about yourself in studying everybody else's incentive systems?
So I will say one thing that I learned from doing Freakonomics that I did for a while and I decided I don't like it anymore was Levitt. I'm not blaming this on Levitt at all. Hanging out with economists did make me really think about making a lot more decisions on a really fully rational basis. Like, the old dilemma about, someone needs help. Who needs help more? Some kind of either not a good Samaritan. That was just one guy, I guess. But, there's all these moral dilemmas. There's the famous railroad switch one. You do it to save the one or the five, et cetera, who's more deserving of praise and punishment and so on. And so I do think that economists bring not a cold-blooded, but a cold-eyed rationality to a lot of policy conversations that are very, very important, okay? And I will never give up on that. But if you start looking at everything that way, it makes you a cold person. And so I feel like for a while, I tried a form of being as a parent, as a husband, as a friend, that was a little bit like, that really doesn't matter. The data show that doesn't matter. And even though the data show that it doesn't matter, how people feel about it matters. And, we're all a lot more than what the probabilities say. Probability is very important, and data is important. But I feel like the connection between people is far more important. And I think that kindness is, better than anything. I think with kindness, you can, maybe kindness is too small and personal. I think decency, I think like if I were George Costanza and I were collecting fake charity checks for Christmas on Seinfeld, I would call it the Human Decency Project. I think he called his the Human Fund, which was, maybe slightly better. But I think that decency is a virtue that has been appreciated throughout civilization. We see it. We have the ancient writings. I think it's appreciated differently now than it has been in the past, but I think it will be appreciated more in the future. And I think that decency is a kind of foundation upon which to build your life, whether personally, professionally, politically, and so on. And so that's a way that I've kind of changed, but that was really getting more back to how I was raised as a kid. That's who my parents were.
We could certainly use more decency. What can the Freakonomics mindset offer in this age of misinformation and disinformation?
This sounds like the advice of an old man, which is what I'm getting to be, so I can do it, and I can even do it in that voice, right? Say it like that. It sounds more legitimate. I think people need to really understand their relationships with their phones and with their online world. I see a lot of very well-educated adults bemoaning what's happening to their children. And when I look at the adults, I'm like, oh my goodness, physician, heal thyself. Like it's a real issue. I don't mean just addiction. I don't mean just like not being able to go through dinner. Like I have this thing. I haven't identified what this moment is. It's a moment in a conversation in person with someone. It could be friends at dinner. It's that moment when someone says something that is just enough of an invitation to, oh, hang on, I'll look it up for you. And then really what they want to do is they want to look at the 19 other things that is like, it's driving them crazy that they're not up to date at the moment. So there's just so much evidence to me that our relationship with information and misinformation is unhealthy. You need time to think. I feel like, this is something Levitt always preached, and I really came to be a big believer in it too. One thing that's great about being a university professor, which he was, or being a journalist, writer, which I am and which you are, is part of your job is to sit and think. And when you think, it's a different process than just reacting. You read about something, you try to say, well, do I have any level of experience to judge whether this is interesting, whether it's important, and so on, all those things. And then you get to live with it for a couple days. And it's like a good wintertime stew. It gets a little bit better every day. You're bringing in more and more elements of your thinking to that idea. And that's what thinking is. And we not only don't do very much of it, but I feel like we don't encourage very much of it too. It happens in the university, but the universities are fighting kind of fighting for their lives in a lot of ways right now. So I think if the question was, which I'm pretty sure it wasn't, what's something? What was the actual question?
Oh gosh.
Was it? Finally.
You stumped me.
Yeah, I think it might have been something about like Freakonomics.
Oh, yeah. What can the Freakonomics mindset offer in the age of disinformation?
So I think it would be.
Thank you for
You're
the
welcome.
support. Appreciate it.
It's the least I could do. I think it would be literally an invitation to think of yourself as a thinker. Make some time. Could be 15 minutes. It could be 15 minutes on the treadmill without a podcast. It could be 15 minutes walking the dog without a podcast. It could be talking with someone without phones, without screens, and really listening to them in a way you haven't before. It could be watching TV. It could be watching a film. It could be thinking about that film. You know, my wife is a visual person. She was a photographer, and she looks at art and visual things in a way that I'm learning to after all these years, and I love it. But it took me a long time. And she likes to say there are picture people like her, and there are word people like me, and never the twain shall meet. We process things in very, very different ways. People have a lot of different styles of processing and using information, whether it's visual or whatever. And so I will sometimes now, I'll see a picture. It could be a painting or could be a scene from a film that I just remember and start to think about that in a way that I never used to do. And so I think if you let yourself be a thinker in that way, it will not only make you more pleasant in yourself, more pleasant to be around other people, but I really think it leads to better insights, because insights don't come from that kind of, no, you're wrong, I'm right, let me shout at you for 30 seconds. That does not lead to any insights at all. It's a very kind of cheap form of entertainment, and the reason I say it's cheap is because it's cruel. It's taking advantage of people who want to learn about these issues of the day and treating them like their entertainment. And so I think that's the opposite of the way to be.
Is there any counterintuitive research that's catching your eye?
I'm trying to think through my 1,800 files on my desktop of story ideas. Yeah, there's a lot. You know, I think the biggest potentially somewhat counterintuitive idea at the moment is what is AI and machine learning or automation. I think AI has become, I think, too short a shorthand for a lot of different things, I'm afraid, but it's okay. But I think that the way that many of us have been thinking about what AI is and does will turn out to look very primitive. Will it destroy jobs? Yes, every technology always has. Will it also create some other jobs within that industry? Yes, every other industry always has. But will it also do other things that we can't really anticipate yet that might provide a lot of real benefit? And a lot of people say the answer to that is no. A lot of people say, if I could live in a world with AI or without, right now I would choose without. I don't feel that way. I look at medical diagnosing, for instance, medical diagnostics. You know, there are people who argue, people who know a great deal more than me about how this really works, that it's possible that the cost of medical diagnostics goes to close to zero within 10 years. I mean, it makes sense if you think about it. What physicians try to do to diagnose is very, very, very difficult, and it's a lot of science and a lot of art, and it's a lot of guess, and it's a lot of experience and a lot of luck and so on. But if you look at the success rate of reading mammograms now of a human radiologist versus a computer, I'm pretty sure, this is where when I'm home working, I get to look up the paper and make sure I'm right, but I'm pretty sure I'm right that the computer is going to do way better. If that sort of idea can be applied to medical diagnosis, but also to clinical treatments, to cancer treatment and so on, which is now being applied, the gains from that are mind-boggling. And so I think one potentially counterintuitive finding I'm thinking about right now is what are the results from this new digital age, including AI, that we may look back on in 20 or 50 years and say, oh my goodness, how did we live without that? Isn't it wonderful?
As our conversation comes to a close, there's one wildcard question in here from TK, and he asks, do you think the stock market's going to crash now or in 2026? And if so, what tips can you give? Nice work, TK. Appreciate that.
Is TK like they didn't want to? So in journalism, TK is what you fill in when you don't know the
yeah,
fact.
to come, yeah.
Yeah, but do you think that's actually Is that you? Is that what you're saying? Is this whole thing was just a scam to get me
that's
stock
right.
advice?
That's right. Little insider trading on a Sunday
night.
night.
So it's interesting you say. So I've been having this conversation a lot with a lot of people. Because why was I having this conversation? I know.
It wasn't the lady with the horse, was it?
You're paying attention. So there was a piece somewhere the other day, Wall Street Journal maybe, about, Jason Zweig, I think, about how the old advice for retirees was, no, you don't want to go like 60% stock and 40% bond to preserve. You just want to say 100% stock to the end. Because if you look at the return on average, of course there's more risk in a more volatile market like equities are, but on average, there's more returns. So what are you doing? So that made me think about, there have been many, many, many conventional wisdoms about investing, for sure. And so one of my favorite findings in all of science, and this really comes from a lot of economists at Chicago and elsewhere, is that, a low-cost, market-diversified mutual fund or ETF beats almost anything on average, right? And we know that now. There's a lot of science on that. But if you look at the size of the industry around actively managed funds, and now what we're going to get, so we're doing an episode on this right now on, private equity is an amazingly interesting topic and something that I've done a medium amount on and continue to do. Something like 20% of GDP is essentially controlled by private equity investment firms, which is a lot, up from whatever it was, 4 or 5, maybe 20 years ago. Again, all these need to be fact-checked and footnoted. But with that change, so that has produced a lot of changes in and of itself. But now there's an executive order that will allow anyone with a 401k or other retirement, or maybe just with a brokerage account, to invest in a version of private equity ETFs or funds. But they won't really be like ETFs. They can't be traded the same way because they're not liquid, although there will be some kind of conversion. So that leads to a whole other thing about, well, these will be actively managed. And moreover, you know that those fund managers are going to use AI because it's a great tool. So now you're going to have a generation of people investing in AI-aided, actively managed private equity ETFs, which have a massive amount of non-transparency, illiquidity, and it's kind of a guess. So I think that the conventional wisdoms of investing are constantly needing to be re-examined, and that's one that, am I answering any version of the question that you asked?
And then some. That's terrific.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you what, your work reminds us that curiosity is a civic virtue, and this book, the podcast, really everything that you have contributed exists as a public service. So thank you, and thank you for your time tonight. It's a delight to be in conversation with you. Congratulations on 20 years,
Thank you.
Stephen Dubner.
You're very kind. That's really nice. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Terrific. Thank you all. Thank you. Okay, let's go. Okay.
Thank you so much to Stephen Dubner and Geoff Bennett, and thank you all for joining us. Please keep your seats while our guests make their way backstage. In just one moment, we'll let you know. Great. Thanks so much for your patience. All right, great. You can exit using the main lobby and both corner lobbies. All the exits are on this level. Please don't go downstairs to exit. And autographed books are for sale in the main lobby. Thanks, and hope to see you back here soon.